So let's talk about something incredibly important: why a deep, science-based education on narcissistic personality disorder isn't just some interesting topic to read about. No, it's actually the most critical first step you can take for self-protection. We're going to break down exactly how knowledge becomes your best defense, your shield. Does that question hit home? If you've ever been in any kind of relationship, whether it's with a partner, a boss, or even a family member that just leaves you constantly second guessing yourself, well, you are definitely not alone. This feeling, this constant state of confusion and self-doubt, it's a classic hallmark experience for people who are dealing with narcissistic abuse. And what do we do when we're confused? We try to make sense of it. We find these rational explanations for behavior that really hurts. We tell ourselves things just like this to get by. They might even seem logical at the time. But these little justifications serve a really dangerous purpose. They stop us from seeing the real underlying pattern of abuse for what it is. Right, so this whole cycle of making excuses and then getting hurt again, it creates what experts call the fog of confusion. And when you're in that fog, without a solid psychological map to understand what's really going on, your self-esteem and your mental clarity just start to slowly, almost silently fade away. And here is the absolute truth of the situation. A lack of information is the abuser's single greatest advantage. Seriously, as long as you don't recognize the playbook they're using, you stay vulnerable to all these subtle manipulations that are designed to keep the relationship off balance, basically tracking you right inside that fog. Okay, so to clear that fog, we need to understand the machine that's creating it. It's time to pull back the curtain and look at the actual mechanics of narcissistic abuse, the very specific, very recognizable patterns that are so often hidden in plain sight. You see, this emotional roller coaster, it's not random. It follows a very predictable three-stage cycle. First up is idealization. This is where you're put on a pedestal, just showered with intense affection. Then, and it can feel like it comes out of nowhere, comes the devaluation, this sudden shift to criticism, coldness, and hostility. And finally, there's the discard, where you're just abandoned, either emotionally or physically. Recognizing this isn't random, that it is a deliberate pattern, that's a huge first step. So what's the engine driving that whole cycle? It's a really powerful psychological tool called intermittent reinforcement. All it is a calculated switch between affection and rejection. But the neurochemical impact it has on our brains is actually comparable to a full-blown addiction. It's the unpredictability of getting that reward, that brief return to the good times, that creates this powerful traumatic bond. It leaves you hooked on the highs and just desperately trying to avoid those terrible lows. And believe me, the abuser's toolkit is pretty extensive. On top of that main cycle, there are all these other corrosive tactics used to keep control. Take triangulation, for example. It's not just about making you jealous. It is a calculated move to create instability by dragging a third person into your dynamic, an ex, a friend, a coworker. It makes you feel insecure, like you're easily replaceable. Then you've got gaslighting, which just chips away at your sense of reality, and the silent treatment, a brutal form of punishment designed to isolate you. Just learning the names for these tactics is the first step in taking their power away. So, what do we do about all this? Well, this brings us to the real heart of what we're talking about today, using knowledge not just as information, but as an active, protective shield. The transformation that happens when you gain this knowledge is honestly profound. You can just see the shift here, from a place of confusion, self-blame, and total vulnerability, to a place of clarity, validation, and self-protection. It is a fundamental change from a position of weakness to one of genuine, empowered strength. All right, so you're probably asking, how do I build this intellectual armor? Where do I even start? Well, this section is a practical guide, and I want to emphasize that it's all about academic rigor. Now, this is absolutely critical because where you get your information from matters a lot. The internet is just flooded with sensationalist content that turns narcissism into a cartoon villain. We have to ignore that and turn to credible academic sources, clinical studies, peer-reviewed articles, and diagnostic manuals like the DSM-5. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, by the way. It's the guide that actual clinicians use worldwide. This is where the real, unfiltered, and helpful information is. So what should be on your study guide? First, start with the official diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. Then, you've got to explore the subtypes, because a grandiose, overt narcissist acts very differently from a vulnerable or covert one. And crucially, you need to learn about comorbidities. That's just the clinical term for when other disorders exist alongside NPD. For instance, when traits from borderline personality disorder are in the mix, it can add this intense emotional chaos. And when you see traits from antisocial personality disorder, you get a profound lack of remorse that makes the abuse so much more dangerous. Understanding all these layers is key to seeing the whole picture. Now, once you start down this path of learning, something really profound begins to happen inside you. So let's focus on that transformation and the incredible, empowering impact that this knowledge has on someone who is trying to heal from this kind of abuse.
First, it's so important to validate the pain, because the consequences of this abuse are very real and clinically documented. We're talking about chronic anxiety, depression, major trouble with memory, a slow erosion of your own identity, and very often, complex PTSD. See, unlike standard PTSD from a single event, complex PTSD comes from prolonged, repeated trauma, exactly like what happens in an abusive relationship. Just seeing these symptoms listed in black and white can be an incredibly powerful first step.
And all of that research leads to this, what is maybe the single most powerful moment in the entire healing process. It's that moment you read a clinical description of the abuse and you realize, oh my God, this is my life. I'm not making this up. I am not crazy. It is such a profound and incredible moment of validation. And that moment, that flash of recognition, is the turning point. It's when you finally break free from the distorted reality the abuser has worked so hard to build around you. You take back your own story, your own narrative, and your own sense of what is real. Ultimately, this is what it all comes down to. Learning about this subject isn't just some passive academic thing you do. It is an active, I'd even say defiant, act of psychological and emotional empowerment. It gives you the solid ground you need to stand on, the foundation for every other healing and defense strategy you're going to build. So we end with this question, because you see, knowledge isn't just about understanding what happened in the past, it's about arming yourself for the future. With this new clarity, you now have a choice. You have the agency to build a safer, healthier life for yourself. The first step was to understand. The next step, well, that's yours to take.